Zoran Mamdani, an immigrant Islamist socialist, has recently won the election to become mayor of New York. For the first time, the Democratic Party in the United States has really lost control of the party to the extreme left wing. And there are many leftists and socialists here in the UK in particular celebrating this. They're expecting this to lead to a similar sort of populist socialist uprising in the UK that destroys reform and the Conservatives and other right-wingers and turns the UK into a left-wing paradise with no property, no money, no landlords and no crime. Now, thankfully for us all, this is an utter delusion, and I want to explain why the opposite is going to happen, why this left-wing populist surge is actually going to destroy the left in the UK, the Labour Party in particular, and put us all back on the right track. So first of all, I want to play you all a short clip here from a New Statesman podcast looking at exactly this topic, at Zoran Mamdani winning the election, and just to show you what some leftists are actually saying about this.
The events of the election, but I want to talk mainly about what's being said on the British left about this victory, because it's seen as quite significant, George. What did Wes Streeting say about it, for example?
So he said, look, there are lessons for progressives all over the world here. And
Wes Streeting, very prominent in Labour, taking inspiration from Zoran Mamdani.
Background. Might not be expected to be a natural fan of Zoran Mamdani. Wes Streeting likes to win. He recognises a winner, and he's also been making eyes at Labour's soft left, you could say, recently, looking for common ground and someone who wants a more values-led approach. And so I think he's saying that there are lessons we can draw from Mamdani in terms of how you take on the authoritarian right.
The left are trying to learn from Zoran Mamdani.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because it wasn't
to see if they can replicate his
from
success.
Labour ministers, was it? Bridget Phillipson seemed to struggle to respond to it when she was in an interview.
The
she said she
Starmerites,
following the election.
They're less happy about it.
Response, Megan?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I mean, I think Bridget Phillipson, something I think I admire about her is she is very sort of on her brief, and I could very much see that, you know, she's so focused on education, she hasn't had that much time to look more widely, and that's maybe a charitable explanation. But I do think that, you know, Patrick Maguire, formerly of this parish, had a good rant on Times Radio yesterday when he was sort of saying about the MPs who have, like Wes, kind of been like, oh, Mamdani's victory is great, blah, 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 sort of to get a grip, you know. I actually think it's funny thinking about what if Mamdani were in Parliament, would he be in the PLP, or would he have had the whip removed like Zara Sultana or, you know, Brian Leishman? Are his actual politics really aligned with this current iteration of the Labour Party?
With the Starmerites, I think certainly they aren't.
So
but most backbencher Labour MPs, I think they actually are.
Across
the people who actually make up the Labour Party.
I think Bridget Phillipson's response was maybe a bit more honest than other members.
She basically said she doesn't really know who Labour Mamdani is.
Senate election in Caerphilly, let alone, you know, mimic these kind of politics.
I think two things can be true.
Yeah.
I agree, it's sort of galling when you have people who probably haven't been following the mayoral race that closely, who suddenly pin metaphorical Mamdani badges to their jackets, and it's sort of jumping on the bandwagon. And anyone who suggests that there's a simple playbook that you can take off the shelf here for UK politics is being sort of willfully naive or misleading. But what I think is telling about this election is it does reflect some of the trends that are reshaping politics across the West. I mean, one is the dominance of cost of living issues. So as you said,
cost of living. That's a very important takeaway from this. We're going to come back to that.
Policy proposals on that. You know, policy was his comms essentially, and then it's the power of the attention economy. Now, how do politicians stand out in
social
this
media as well?
Environment?
Very important thing. We're going to come back to.
Eyes are being pulled in multiple directions. And who are the politicians who are exploiting that in the UK? It's Nigel Farage, it's Zach Balansky in the Greens, and Ed Davey in his own way with his stunts. And there are...
Funnily enough, actually, the biggest winner of social media politics in the UK is Nigel Farage and Robert Jenrick. But of course, left-wing audience, they're not going to be talking about that. So what these leftists are focused on in the wake of Mamdani's victory is that actually the left wing of the Labour Party is celebrating the win, like people like Jeremy Corbyn and Zach Balansky outside, you know, even further left than the left of the Labour Party as well. The centre of the Labour Party, which is still fairly left-wing, the Starmerites and the Rachel Reeves of the party, they're a little bit worried about the win because they see Zoran Mamdani as more attributable to, say, Zach Balansky of the Greens and a threat to the Labour Party. And they also think that the two other reasons that Zoran Mamdani won the election is he focused on cost of living issues and he was really, really good at harnessing social media and capturing the attention economy, which I actually think is fairly true. Now, something that Zoran did really well is he went for these really key slogans and simple, easy talking points, much like what we see Trump and Farage do more recently, right? Trump had that infamous lock her up about Hillary Clinton, and then that build that wall slogan as well. 3 words, really, really simple, make America great again, very catchy. Farage has done a little bit of similar stuff too, right? Stop the boats and net stupid zero. Really, really catchy catchphrases that are just easy to understand. The problem with Starmer and Labour is that they have no core cohesive beliefs or values, right? They want people to focus on things like their renters' rights bill, but instead, the actual people in the UK, they're instead focusing on Labour taking away winter fuel payments from pensioners and letting prisoners out of jail accidentally to roam the streets and commit more crimes. Now, Mamdani's youth allowed him to appeal to younger people because he is a younger person. Starmer and the Labour Party, the reason they're not going to benefit from this is that they are human rights lawyers. They're knighted, establishment figures. They are the deep state and the establishment, the political, the media elite. And so they're never going to be able to capture that sort of organic from the ground movement that Zoran Mamdani was able to reach, and that actually people like Zach Polanski and even Jeremy Corbyn to a certain extent are able to get. Now, recently, we've seen the Green Party in the UK have a rather large boost in the polls, which correlates perfectly with Zach Polanski becoming the leader, who is very social media savvy. We've also seen a load more of the left-wing members of the Labour Party get more popular. We've had, the deputy leadership election, which was won by, frankly, a full-on socialist and not the centre-left candidate that was supported by Starmer. And then we've had repeated, rumours and sort of semi-coups pop up against Starmer from, again, the left of the Labour Party trying to take back control of their socialist organisation. Now, left-wingers in the UK, they're likening the win by Mamdani in New York, and they're saying that that is going to correlate and cause basically this huge surge of left-wing politics in the UK, where we'll see the fall of the right wing, with the fall of Reform and the Tories entirely, and even the fall of sometimes, the centre of the Labour Party, all to be replaced with left-wingers like Zach Polanski and Jeremy Corbyn all over again. But I think that this is entirely wrong, because these people aren't actually looking at the data, and they don't understand why Mamdani actually won this election in New York. And the reason is because New York is dominated by immigrants, and Zoran Mamdani ran on an immigration platform. This here is some exit polling from this recent mayoral election in New York, and it asked people, how long have you lived in New York and who did you vote for? Those who have lived in New York for less than 5 years, so very new immigrants, voted 83% for Mamdani, 15% for Cuomo, and a tiny bit for Sliwa, right? If you moved to New York 5 to 10 years ago, so you're still an immigrant, but not as recent, 76% voted for Mamdani. If you've been here for more than 10 years, but you are not a native New Yorker, you weren't born here, still, you are more likely to vote for Mamdani than anyone else, 54%. And then if you were actually born in New York City, you're most likely to vote for Cuomo. This is really, really clear, right? People who are actual New Yorkers who were born and raised in New York, they voted for Cuomo. Those not born in New York, the immigrants to that city, they voted for Mamdani. Now, let's also not forget that there is no ID requirement to vote in these New York elections. In fact, it's illegal to show your ID at these elections. All you're allowed to do is tell them your name and an address, and they will supposedly cross-reference it to check that you're a legal voter, but there's nothing stopping you from putting in different names and different addresses and just lying about who you are and voting illegally. There does seem to be a lot of voter fraud in New York. And let's also not forget that actually New York is not just a city of immigrants, but illegal immigrants in particular. All the way back in 2007, there was a report which estimated there were 535,000 illegal immigrants in New York City alone, and that illegal immigrants made up 18% of all the immigrants in New York City alone. Now, certainly, or almost certainly, at least in my opinion, that number is going to be much, much higher today than it was, 20 years ago, because we've had ridiculous levels of illegal immigration over the last 20 years, in particular under Biden and Harris in the United States. Now, some other stats for you. There are about 4.1 million legal immigrants living in New York, and then there's probably about another million or so illegal. So it is not too much to say that actually New York is absolutely dominated by non-native New Yorkers. When we're talking about immigrants as well, we're talking about immigrants to the United States as a whole. We're not talking about people who immigrated from another state into New York. So native New Yorkers are a minority in their own city, and Zohran Mamdani catered and pandered to that very distinct demographic. Zach Polanski equally caters to that exact same demographic. The hyper left-wing groups, right? These young women who are at university paid for by daddy studying gender studies, and the immigrants who have created this awful cabal. Now, the issue with this entire concept and why this isn't going to lead to a left-wing surge in the UK, well, not really an issue, this is good for us, it's good for our country, is the fact that the UK isn't New York. First of all, Britain doesn't have the same history with immigration that the United States has. It genuinely isn't rooted into our history over hundreds and hundreds of years. A stat which I always find shocks people is that in 1950, it's estimated that there were no more than 20,000 non-white residents in the entire United Kingdom, almost all of whom had been born outside the UK and then moved into England. And actually, when some of the people watching this video as well were young children, there were less than 20,000 ethnic minorities in the entire UK. Now there are 12 million. Now that's a ridiculous level of increase in immigration, and we can all appreciate that. But that still only represents about 17% of the population right now that are actually immigrants or descended from immigrants in the UK right now. Now, New York, where this immigrant politics is successful, where Zohran Mamdani managed to win the election based on catering and pandering to immigrants, 37% of New York right now is foreign-born immigrants, 70% is non-white. So that basically means that they are immigrants or the descendants of immigrants. So New York is literally a majority immigrant city. So of course, they are going to vote in a hugely pro-immigrant leftist mayor. And actually, it's incredibly similar to what we see in London, right? Sadiq Khan is objectively awful at his job. He is a horrific man, frankly ought to be in jail. And London is struggling and getting worse. Crime is up, rents are up, cost of living is up, services are worse, council tax is higher. But he's elected year after year every time he runs because he's a leftist and he's distinctly pro-immigrant. And London right now is only about 35% white British, which means 2/3 of the city is either an immigrant or a descendant of an immigrant. Now that hyper-left immigrant politics, it works in a city like New York, it works in a city like London, because these are super multi-ethnic cities where immigration dominates the populace. But this politics doesn't perform well in the rest of the country. And the United States and the United Kingdom, they are still majority white countries, just not in these main metropolitan centres. Now, why am I so sure that this policy, this Mamdani victory, is actually going to destroy the left in the UK? Because they refuse to realise this simple fact, and they refuse to acknowledge that actually they do live in a metropolitan bubble. So the left in the UK are going to move further left to try and get closer to that Mamdani voter base, and they're going to alienate themselves from the majority of the country even further. And Zach Polanski, I believe, is a perfect example of this. Here's an article he wrote for The Guardian 1 month ago. Migration is Britain's superpower. Our future depends on embracing that truth, not denying it. Again, 70 years ago, when my grandparents were born, there were basically 0.01% of the country was an immigrant. That's how new immigration is to the UK. So again, this idea that it's Britain's superpower just doesn't stand up to scratch. We've gotten poorer comparatively compared to the rest of the world over the last 70 years, not richer. And also, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that actually British people don't agree that immigration is a super power for the UK. This here is some polling showing what people think are the most key important issues in the United Kingdom right now. As you can see, 48% of people in the UK think that the biggest problem facing the country is immigration, right? That does not align with this leftist politics of immigration is a superpower. And actually, all the other issues that we see here really come back to immigration and are heavily impacted by immigration as well. The economy, right? Well, look, 42% of immigrants born outside the UK outside the EU who have moved into the UK, so immigrants from places like Africa, they don't work. That means they are a drain on the state and they cost you money to exist here. 42% of them, that's a huge proportion. There are 1.2 million immigrants in the UK right now claiming universal credit benefits. We could save £13 billion a year instantly cutting that out. Again, there are 7% of children in primary schools are direct immigrants, 10% in secondary school right now in the UK are direct immigrants, not the descendants of immigrants. That's about 650,000 children, and each kid costs about £8,500 a year. We could instantly save £5 billion a year by not giving away free education to immigrants. Frankly, if we halted immigration overnight, or we'd never started this process of mass immigration 20, 25, 30 years ago, there would be no need for the tax rises that Labour are forcing us through right now. So this economic problem really comes down to immigration. NHS, hospitals and healthcare, 2% of people who emigrate into the UK go on to work in the NHS. Less than 1% go into work as a doctor in the NHS. So again, this line from the left that says that, oh, we need doctors from foreign countries to make sure the NHS can function, it just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The vast majority of immigrants coming into the UK are not going on to work in the NHS as doctors or nurses. And we can just keep letting the doctors in if we need to. We don't have to say no to talented and qualified doctors. We can still say, oh, this sort of immigration is brilliant, these qualified doctors. We don't want, however, the benefit scroungers. Immigration, on the whole in the UK, adds more pressure to our health service than it fixes. Here we have inflation and prices, the next most important topic. Guess what? That is simple supply and demand. The price of everything in our economy is set by supply and demand. If you add more supply for a good, right, more people producing it, prices fall. Now, immigrants who come into the UK and don't work, the 42% of immigrants who come into the UK from outside the EU, they do not work, they are not adding to our supply, so those people are not pushing prices down. But immigrants who come to the UK, no matter what they do, they have to buy things. They have to buy food and living houses. They have to add to demand. That increases prices and causing inflation. Population growth causes inflation. Housing, the exact same issue here. Immigrants have to live somewhere, right? The more people who are bidding for a house to buy or to rent, the higher the prices of that rent or house price, right? If we stop increasing the population through immigration, we can easily, almost overnight, solve the housing crisis. Defence, foreign affairs, terrorism. There is a very, very strong argument to be made that the UK is weaker with immigration, not stronger. Here's a rather incredible article from the New York Times, no less, back in 2015 about the problem with British Muslims joining ISIS. Her Majesty's jihadists. More British Muslims joined Islamist militant groups than served in our country's own armed forces. And this article goes on to establish why this is happening and the research that's gone into it. And I personally have some experience with this, funnily enough, right? I went to this school here called the Royal Grammar School. It's a really prestigious state-run school. You don't pay fees for this. You have to pass a test when you're young to get in. And it's really, really prestigious to go here. I went to school with this guy. It's called Suleiman Shabazz, or Shabazz Suleiman, sorry. I went to school with this guy, and he left school to go and join ISIS. Literally someone I was walking next to in the hallways every single day. Sadly, integration in the UK has largely failed, in particular with non-Western immigration, and mass immigration is actually one of the big reasons that we have such dangerous streets and why we need such a strong armed forces. Crime and law and order, of course, it's the exact same thing as well. Sexual assault and rape, they skyrocket whenever we see mass immigration in every country around the world. The correlation is so ridiculous. And here's my overarching point here. Even if immigration, if illegal and mass immigration here, even if itself wasn't unpopular, which it is, the outcomes of that immigration are incredibly unpopular. And so the left is going to push harder on this pro-immigrant base because they see Mamdani's win as evidence that it works, and they're going to use that as an excuse to push Labour harder left and to force Starmer further left or replace Starmer with a more hard left candidate. And this isn't going to work for the left in this country. It's going to make them make even more mistakes and make the country even worse, and their polling will get even further negative. This is going to destroy the Labour Party and the left, and of course, thankfully, Kier Starmer as well. That's it for this video. If you have any comments for me, leave them down below in the description. I'll try and get round to reading all of them. Of course, if you want to help my channel out, help me grow, share this video with someone else, a friend, a co-worker, a family member, someone else who needs to see the truth about Zohran Mamdani's win and why it isn't going to lead to a left-wing surge and why actually the right is pretty much set to dominate politics in the UK going forward for years. Other than that, thanks for watching and cheers. There is a coup attempt against Kier Starmer happening right now as we speak, and it follows reports of another separate coup attempt back in September against Kier Starmer by Andy Burnham that time. Now, Starmer has been flying around the world, visiting different countries and hiding from the problems that he's created in Britain for us all.